Hi, my name is Christopher Holliday. I'm currently a student athlete at UNC in my freshman year, and I'm on the football team. Today, I am joined by and lucky enough to interview my granddad, Harvey Gantt. So thank you for joining us today.
Welcome.
So I think I'm just going to go with the first question. So what was it like growing up in the South in the 40s and 50s?
I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in the 40s and the 50s, as you said. And, much of it was a pretty happy childhood. I had parents and four siblings, four sisters, and we lived in a nice all Black neighborhood. That's the basic and defining characteristic of that period, is that we lived in a segregated time. We went to segregated elementary and high schools. Uh, we had to sit at the back of the bus. We had to drink from separate water fountains. Um, but my father had a good job, and my mother took care of home really well, and we did well in school. And I just had to get used to, well, not get used to it, I wasn't accustomed to anything else, living in a segregated existence. One of the things that made me proud of my childhood was that my parents never made me feel second class. And the effect of Jim Crowism, or legal segregation, as it was in the South at that time, was that they made you a second class citizen. But interestingly enough, as a family, we never felt second class. And in the neighborhood that I lived in, everybody felt that they were going to go as far as their abilities were going to take them. And that's what we got during that period, which started to come to an end when I was 11 years old. And the Supreme Court of the United States said that segregation was unconstitutional. And for my family, this was like a great weight lifted off of our shoulders, in the sense that my father, who was a big NAACP member at that time, always said, well, this means, Harvey, and to my sisters, that you guys can go anywhere you want to go, to school or to use facilities. And I actually started reading everything I could about how the South was going to change. It took a long time, though. It took a very long time, and it didn't happen nearly as immediately as I thought at 11 years. Overall, though, let me just summarize by saying I grew up in a very warm and loving family, parents that loved me, sisters that admired me. I loved them, and had a good time in school, was a high school athlete, and a good student too. So my childhood did not impair me, even though we lived under strict segregation laws.
Wow, that's amazing. So I've seen you instill education as such an important value with my aunts and uncles and my mom. And so is that something that your parents instilled in you? And why did you see it as such an important thing for an African American to get a high quality education?
Well, that's a rather easy question. First of all, my parents had less than a high school education. My dad went no further than eighth grade. My mother went to 11th grade. So they didn't have any hardware to display to their children. But their good common sense said that if our kids are going to get anywhere in the world of tomorrow, they need to get more than simply a high school education. They need to go on to college. They need to do well in school. And then we had examples all around us in a segregated neighborhood where we see Black lawyers, and we saw Black teachers, of course, and we saw Black ministers and Black doctors. And we would always inquire about the status of those folks. And my parents would always say, well, they certainly didn't drop out of junior high or high school. They went on to college. In fact, the doctor went to school for 8 years. That was impressive to us, that these people went to school so long. So education became, we took it like we took our mother's milk when we were babies. It was just something that there was no choice in our family. And then I had teachers in the schools that I went to that were great encouragement to me. Everywhere from my fifth grade teacher, who discovered that I had a talent for drawing, to my ninth grade teacher who directed me in the area of architecture, to my guidance counselor who said, you got to keep going. And why don't you pick a school? If you're going to study architecture, go to a school that will challenge you. So all along the way, I thought I had no other expectation of me than to do well in school. And of course, I was going to pass that on to your mom and all of our children. And hopefully they pass it on to you. I think they did.
Yeah, they definitely did. And you can see that's honestly why I'm here, because the way that you and your parents set the standard for education in our family. And so you mentioned your
Thank you.
love of architecture. And so I kind of want to go to Clemson and how you were the first African American there, and kind of your experiences, and how do you feel about being a trailblazer and setting a path for others that have followed?
Well, I actually feel great about it, particularly when I look at the Clemson football team today and I see so many African American athletes that are doing so well. I had to get that little piece in there, even though I love UNC and I love the Tar Heels because my grandson's there and his father played there also. Anyway, my first notions about going to study architecture were that I should go to the schools that taught architecture to African Americans, Tuskegee Institute, A&T here in our state, and Howard University. And I applied to those schools and I was accepted. But I'll never forget the day a guidance counselor came to me and said, Harv, I know you can do well in those schools, but I bet you can't do well in a school of predominantly white students who study architecture. And why don't you consider going to a white school or a predominantly white school in order to get trained amongst the predominance of who architects were professionally. And they were 99% white in this country, which is itself a telling story of how bad things are. So I took her up on that challenge and I applied to some schools and I got in at Iowa State University. And I found out that going to school in an integrated setting was not all that bad. You still had to study, you still had to retain what the teacher was telling you. You had to put in the time, and I was making good grades, but the weather was too cold in Iowa. So I said, I don't want to stay here. One day I want to go back to the South. I want to be a part of the changes that are going on in the South. I want to have clients who are in the South. I want to build schools and churches and so forth and so on. And I looked around and one day discovered that Clemson had a very good school of architecture. They were in the top 20. You can identify with that. Clemson always strives to be in the top 20 of anything. And they were. They had a school of architecture that was in the top 20. So I applied. And when I applied, Christopher, they told me to send my transcript from high school. And I sent the transcript from high school. And then they told me to stay at Iowa State. And what the transcript from high school showed that I was an African-American student. And they were, of course, not accepting African-American students. They couldn't tell me that for legal reasons. And so I applied 5 times. And each time I got turned down.
Wow.
But something made me tenacious and decided that I needed to keep doing it. Maybe it was this self-confidence that I had, that they wanted to keep me out and I wanted to prove that I could do well there as I was doing in Iowa. And finally, I got a lawyer who represented the NAACP, and they took my case and filed a lawsuit against Clemson in the summer of 1962, after I had applied those 5 different times. And the lawsuit was adjudicated in the courts. And in January of 1963, the the courts admitted me, said that South Carolina could no longer deny me that admission. So in January 28th of 1963, I got out of a car that had my father, my minister, and my lawyer, and went up a hill into Tillman Hall and registered as the first African-American student. And I came out to a crowd of people who were watching, and news people, and answered a few questions. And I heard a student at the back of the crowd said, "Leave that N-word alone, and he will not make it at Clemson because that's just too tough a course he's taking." And I remember vowing to myself that I was going to prove him wrong. I was going to do well there. And I graduated in 1965. I also met my wife and your grandmother, who was the second African-American student. She was a woman, of course. And after about a year of courting her, I married her and graduated from Clemson, married to Lucinda Brawley, and graduated with honors, by the way. And I'm proud to say that. A lot of people ask me why I didn't go out for the football team, since I played football in high school. And I said I didn't have time for that. And Frank Howard's teams were just too tough anyway.
So you bring up the idea of sports and how you played sports in high school. And I know that every time I come up to Charlotte or we're at the beach, we either go play golf or play tennis or we're watching something on TV. What effect has sports had on you throughout your life? And what is the importance of sports, would you say?
Well, first of all, as you know very well, I love sports. I mean, it has always been a part of my life, from stickball in the streets of Charleston to playing Little League baseball, and then, of course, playing high school football, particularly in my junior and my senior year, where we won lower state championships. We never won the championship, though. It was like never winning the Super Bowl, but always getting to the championship game. At any rate, that was just instilled in me. I have this competitiveness, and I think that's what sports gives you. First of all, you learn to work with a team of people. You have to work and coordinate together. You have to train together. You have to go through some hardships together. And I actually thought that helped me in other endeavors in life. I mean, when I struggled in academics, I can remember the toil and strife that I went through as an athlete. And you always believed that if you got knocked down, you got up, picked yourself up, got back into the competition. So as you well know, I'm still a very competitive person. And I still even try to beat you guys in tennis and golf and other kinds of things, as young and as strong as you are now, and as old and decrepit as I am.
Well, you do your best. You do your best. I'll give you that. I will say that. So you also ended up being a very successful politician as the former mayor of Charlotte. So what inspired you to go into politics? Because I know you went to college to become an architect, and you did become an architect and had a very successful firm. So what kind of brought your interest in politics?
Well, one of the things I got taught growing up in Charleston was you always give back. You always try to find a way to contribute to your community. It's not all about you. It is about the quality of life for people around you. I grew up as a Christian, and I just believed in a lot of the tenets of Christianity. And one of those was, in fact, to do your best to help others. And when I got to Charlotte and settled down with Cindy and our children, I started joining neighborhood groups to try to improve our neighborhood. Some folks noticed when I worked with a client in architecture, our client was the city of Charlotte, that we spent a lot of time working in that community, not just trying to build the building, but to help build the neighborhood. So those instincts of helping others sort of led me into politics. So when they had a vacancy, I was asked by the city council if I would be willing to fill that vacancy. for the 1 year that was left on a term, the person who had been elected to that seat. And I said, why not? I mean, I'm helping in the community. I'm trying to do my best to make our city better. I had already gotten a degree in city planning from MIT. So I thought I could help in that sense. And I tried it for a year. My mother, for example, thought that was the craziest thing I could ever do, to get involved with politicians, because for some reason, politicians have always had a negative connotation to people. But that's not always true. I mean, there are some very good people who have served sincerely and done well for the larger community. At any rate, I told my mother I was going to try this for a year, and I didn't have to run again, and I'd at least get this experience. Well, I got in there for 1 year, and I saw the ability to help a lot of people, that the seat had power associated with it and the power to do good. I remember getting a park built in a neighborhood that didn't have any parks, and I remembered helping senior citizens get free rides on the transit system. And by the time that year was up, I decided I like this. So I took to politics like a duck takes to water, and stayed on the city council, got elected 3 times, lost my first run for mayor, and then ran for mayor again, largely because I thought I could be even more effective if I were the leader. As you can see, it takes a little bit of self-confidence, and at the same time having self-confidence and a degree of humility to do well in a leadership role. That is, to listen to others, to work hard, because you're looking at that bigger picture of how you're going to make the city of Charlotte better. And I think we made it better in the years that I served in politics there. The city grew, it expanded, it got lots of new jobs coming to town, and all those kinds of things that make me feel good even to this day.
Yeah, I would say that many, I don't know what you call natives of Charlotte, but many natives of Charlotte would support you as being one of their best mayors. I've talked to many people there, and they're like, "You're Harvey Gantt's grandson. I loved him as a mayor," and so you're still loved there to this day.
Well, you're nice to say that. And I hope that inspires Christopher Holliday to continue on the great path you've already set for yourself. And I'd like to think I had a little bit to do with it through your mother and your father, who has had a significant career himself.
Yeah, I think that you and Grandma both set the standard for all of us kind of to follow, and you showed us what we needed to do, and you kind of instilled values in our parents that were passed down to us and all the grandkids, that there's this standard of excellence that we all need to strive for and achieve for, and anything less than giving your best is enough. So
Wow.
yeah,
I am so proud of you.
thank you.
I'm so glad that I had that kind of influence on your life. And I just hope you keep going forward.
Absolutely. So I have one last question for you. So we're in a climate where everyone's so disagreeable and everyone's arguing all the time. So as this generation of college students goes on to their adulthoods and having more influence in the world, what are a couple of pieces of advice that you give college students as they enter the workforce and enter society as a whole?
That's a great question. And I don't know that I could truly fully answer it, because I've got lots of things going through my mind today. I'm seeing so much divisiveness and so much lack of unity and so much bitterness out there. And I know that as a nation, we've got to be better than that. We have been better than that. We have come through some tough times before. In our own heritage as Black people, we have come a long way in a country that has tried to resist it for generations, our being first-class citizens. But I know that the way forward for this country is that enough good people stand up for what is right. Enough good people. It's when good people are silent that things go awry. Things don't go in the right direction. So I often would say this. First of all, get to know your neighbor. Get to know your neighbor, whether that's your roommate, your teammate, the person's living in your neighborhood. Be honest with each other. Tell the truth. Seek the truth. In these days, I'm hearing something called alternative facts. And no such things as alternative facts. There are facts out there. There is a truth out there. You ought to be seeking the truth. Because when everybody starts off with the same facts, we might have disagreements about what we need to do, but at least we've got that base to stand on. And then we can try to find ways to come together. This country is not gonna be the great nation it was intended to be if in fact we have these divisions, race being the first, and then all the other elements that have piled up since then. Inequality, social justice issues, police brutality, all those things. I'm an optimist, Christopher. I believe we can overcome that, but we got to talk to each other first. We got to be honest. We got to agree on what the facts are, and then we can go forward. An example of what I mean by that is that what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, a lot of people were operating on a different set of facts on who won the election. And so if they've got different set of facts, we have a hard time talking to each other. We have a hard time bringing about the unity I keep hearing about so much today. Unless we're willing to do those things I've just talked about, we're not going to make it. I recall my days in politics when the city council I had to work with was both Republican and Democrat. And I knew that I could win if I could count. We had 11 people on the city council, and all I needed to do was get 6 people going my way. But that was not enough. I spent lots of time trying to look at the other side, to try to appreciate where they are, and then to help the people who were on my side understand some of what was going on the other side. That's not too confusing. And then we came to decisions that made sense that all of us could get behind. That's hard work. And sometimes people don't want to do the hard work of getting people to come together. But tell the truth, find the facts, be honest with yourself. I think we'll be a better country if more people did that.
Yeah.
Be a good neighbor.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think that everyone who's watching this or listening to it should 100% just think about that. Am I doing what I need to do in order to move this country in the right direction? So thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, how could I do otherwise? You are my son, my grandson, and you're doing very well. And I would make the time, whatever the situation might have been.